All right, good morning, everyone. Y'all hear me okay? All right. No? Okay, I'll just yell real loud. I'm Rick. You can find me on Slack at Refreshing Apathy and on GitHub at Rick Heil. I am the head of client platform engineering for Samsara. We are a tech company building the system of record for physical operations. Our products are things like AI-enabled dash cams, asset trackers, vehicle gateways, all tied into a unified cloud platform that gives our customers all sorts of cool data about how their physical operations are going. And they can use that to streamline their operations, plan routes, deliveries, all sorts of cool stuff. If anyone spots a Samsara dash cam in a vehicle in State College, I will pay you $1. Just find me with a picture of it. For legal reasons, this is a joke. If you're the kind of person who likes to follow along with the slides as I talk, they are on my blog already up there, rickheil.com/PSU2023. You can grab a copy of them there, mark them up. They are also linked in the note-taking Google Doc that's in the PSU Mac 206 channel at the top if you want to grab a copy from there. So in this talk today, we're going to cover something near and dear to every Mac admin's heart, which is MDMs. We all just love our MDMs so much, but sometimes that relationship breaks down a little bit and we have to move. So today we're going to cover that whole process from soup to nuts and hopefully give you some tips on how you can make what's otherwise kind of a painful process just a little bit better for yourself. We'll talk about selecting and working with potential vendors. Talk about running effective trials and proofs of concept. A bulk of our time will be talking about the migration method, which is, in my opinion, the hardest question after which product are we going to go with. And then finally, planning and executing a successful migration program so that every piece falls into place with you losing a minimum of sleep. Quick poll before we get started, though. Show of hands, how many people in here have migrated from one MDM to another before? Okay, all right, a pretty good chunk. How many are planning or expecting to plan one in the next year-ish? Oh, a bunch of people. Keep your hand up if you're excited about that move. Yeah, that's what I thought. There's no hands. I counted this when I was thinking about it and finishing my slides last night. I've done 6 MDM migrations in the last 8 years. The job I had before Samsara was a merger and acquisition-based company, so as soon as they bought a new company, that company had Macs because we were in the advertising space, and so every single year there'd be another migration to do. I wouldn't say excited is a word I'd usually use to describe the process, but we did get pretty good at them, and I'm hoping I can share some of that with you today. One other note I want to make before we get into things is about commercial versus open source, which is a debate that we have constantly at my work. I'm pretty confident that the majority of people here are paying a vendor to host their MDM. Some orgs do some really cool stuff with micro MDM or nano MDM, 2 open source ones I'm available, maybe have something really cool internal they haven't shared yet. And that's awesome. If you aren't buying a product, most of these methods beyond the evaluating vendors stuff should still be applicable to you, maybe with a couple differences, but if you're doing your own thing, you're probably smart enough to figure it out. I still hope you get something out of this. I'd also like to take a second to mention that while some of my examples may hint at specific vendors, or I might have forgotten to take a name out somewhere, I'm not trying to influence you. No vendor is purely good or purely bad. There are a lot of different choices. Your problems that you're solving with MDM are in different shapes and sizes. MDMs are in different shapes and sizes. Pick the one that's the best fit for you and your organization. So let's get started on our lovely migration journey. MDM migrations contain a built-in screen reader called VoiceOver. It would be nice if we had a little more assistance from Apple in this process. MDM migration is not designed to be something easy or painless, and in many cases, the tools that we're using in education and enterprise and business that depend on MDM aren't really set up to handle this either. Just kind of like painting a house, good preparation ahead of time is the key to get a smooth and functional result that's going to be scalable and will last a long time so you don't have to do it again. So we'll start with some of the prep. And this is really kind of the boring part, but it's also exciting because this is where you get to kind of in your mind mentally architect where you're going to go with this new MDM. If you've ever been involved in any kind of formal RFP process, part of like a basics that your procurement team probably said is, hey, what are your requirements? It's the first time I'm going to say requirements of about 50 today, I think. Requirements is really just a list of things that you need. It's a spreadsheet, a document, a list, whatever you want to get out of the solution. And it helps you categorize and evaluate vendors against one set of criteria, so that way you know you're making apt comparisons. I like to think of a difference between needs and requirements. The words sound really similar, but there's an important distinction to me. Needs are an end result. They're the state of what you want something to be. A requirement is the pathway for you to get to that need. So, for example, a need could be Google Chrome is always up to date, or full disk encryption is enabled, right? Those are end states that you want to happen. A requirement for those might be the MDM has a system to patch third-party apps and make sure they're up to date. Or a requirement for full disk encryption might be, hey, you can manage file vault via configuration profile. So those are very specific actions that show the pathway to you getting to your needs. Next, you need to categorize and rank that list. Some of that might be easy, right? You say, hey, all these 5 different apps that we have requirements about, well, really it all just boils down to this just needs to deploy a custom configuration profile. Great. Try to keep it as concise as possible. Rank your list, pretty obvious. Start with the most important things. What are the critical things you just absolutely cannot live without, right? This will help you when you get into the vendor evaluations, because as you look at your list, you'll be able to say, well, I really like the way that, vendor A knocks the first top 10 out of the park, even if they're missing 1 or 2 right at the very bottom. And finally, get feedback. If you're lucky enough to have a team of other Mac admins, collaborate on this. Everyone's got their own view. Make sure that you're all approaching the tool and how you're going to architect things the same way. You might ask people in the community, friends from local meetups, people you meet here at Mac Admins or on the Mac Admin Slack, get some feedback and say, hey, is there anything I'm missing that's really obvious? Names redacted to protect the innocent. This is a screenshot of the requirements matrix that I created for our MDM evaluation that we did last year. This was a quick way for me to reference the 4 MDMs we were going to trial, as well as the current vendor. So that way we could kind of see at a glance who's doing what and where. As you can see, I kind of boiled down a lot of our needs around building specific configurations to include like a settings builder type of GUI instead of having to write XML by hand, because I kind of hate that. A little lazy, but that's okay. And then at the bottom, you can see we categorize some of our things based on kind of who the audience is. So admin experience was for us, the Mac admins, the CPE team, and that all has to do with how we interact with the MDM tool. MDM features was really the nerdy part. That was us trying to determine, okay, how much of the Apple MDM protocol is each vendor implementing, because that was something we wanted to track. Agent features was talking about, okay, is there a local agent or a self-service app or something like that? And if so, how does it behave? What can it do? What capabilities does it have? Does it interact with the user? Can we brand it? And then finally, vendor details. Vendor details is all the things that procurement and security was going to require from us. So do they have a SOC 2 Type 2? Are they FedRAMP authorized? All these little questions that it's helpful to have the answer to that ahead of time, just in case they are selected. If there's interest in a sanitized version of this, let me know afterwards. I can probably put one together and throw it on my site. There's only so much you can do with, I see a lot of nodding. Okay, I'll do that. There's only so much you can do with deleting names using preview, so I didn't want to give away too much. So it sounds really dumb, but how do you find an MDM vendor? Obviously, there are a few that everyone knows. But if you ignore all the sponsors' results, Google can be a half-decent way. But I think the best way is through community recommendation, whether that's a value-added reseller or other salesperson that you have a lot of trust with and who knows the Mac admin space well. Is that the Mac admin Slack? Is that your local Mac admin friends from meetup groups or from here? Go check out the sponsors downstairs. It seems a little trite, but like they're here, and that's important, at least to me. Involvement in the community is a really good sign, either here at a conference or on the Mac admin Slack. It kind of signals to me that the vendor takes the experience of their customers really seriously and wants to hear from them, wants to offer a way to interface more informally rather than just through support tickets, and also offers a way for admins to chat about new features or feature requests or the best way to use the tool. That kind of community best practice doesn't come across in just a vendor knowledge base or wiki or documentation. That's something you really get from talking to other people and brainstorming out loud. All right, so we've got our list of vendors, we've got our list of requirements. Now we have to do the fun part, which is sit on about 6 million WebEx and Zoom calls. You can shorten this a little bit, but some vendors are really just going to stick to their process pretty hard. The biggest thing I would have to say about this is to use your requirements. They're not just for you. The smartest sales folks will ask you, hey, do you have a list of things you're looking for? Do you have requirements? Do you have a sheet or a list of needs? Share it. It's good to start from the same point so that they understand what the most important features are to you, so that they can tailor any demos, presentations, other people they want to bring in to talk to you. They can tailor that all to your use case so you're not sitting there like, okay, I don't care about this feature, stop talking about it. For more in-depth requirements, this can also let you know how the vendor thinks about the user experience of their tool, how they expect you to use the tool. Because there's plenty of times where you could do something 3 or 4 different ways. You'll generally want to follow the vendor's paved path so that in 6 months, if they change the feature, you're not left in a lurch. The second thing is to be upfront about your schedule and your company's particular process. Some companies, you just say, yep, I have a credit card. I would like to give you the money. Here you go. I worked at one of those once. It was great. It was easy to buy things. Larger companies, educational institutions, especially nonprofits, there's more paperwork, right? You have to worry about tax status, you have to worry about procurement, you have to worry about security and vendor approvals and all these things. So be upfront with the salespeople. Hey, we're looking to do this yesterday. Can we just do this already? Or hey, we're just in the early stages. We're not looking to make a purchase for at least 6 or 8 months. You're the first person I've reached out to. Slow your roll a little bit. This isn't going to happen right away. And be upfront about your process. Like, hey, I know it's going to take, if we select you, it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks for us to turn around the contract paperwork or approve everything. Be upfront and be honest. A lot of salespeople will appreciate that, and that kind of relationship where you're being honest about things is going to bring that honesty out of them. One that I was surprised by, because I hadn't purchased a net new MDM in a long time, was asking about post-purchase timing. A lot of vendors these days are software as a service, right? So you are maybe a credit card number and a few clicks away from your very own MDM tenant. Some aren't. Some folks, you might be looking at an on-premises MDM that you need to host yourself. It takes time to spin up virtual or physical servers, get them installed, have things assigned, make DNS entries, and some vendors have a very bespoke way of setting things up in some cases. Especially if you're buying professional services, implementation help, all those teams require extra time to schedule and then to teach you and help you implement. So make sure you're counting backwards from kind of your planned launch date, including things like post-purchase timing. Growth is always a tough one. Every finance department has a different way of treating this. Talk to yours, ask them how they like to do it. In many cases, you can say, hey, we have, say, 500 users now. We're expecting to hire 10 more people this year. Let's just build it in for 510. Some finance departments will say, no, you buy exactly what you need now, and we have a separate process for adding. Every smart vendor will say, yes, I will take more of your money. It's just a matter of making sure they're aware, we're going to do this every month, we're going to buy a few more licenses, or every quarter. Or to say, we're going to buy everything we need for the next 3 years, all up front. Make sure you're having that conversation, because in many times it does affect your pricing. And finally, be reasonably cautious about promised new features that have not shipped yet, even if they're publicly announced. I'm not saying don't believe your salespeople, because that's rude, but have a bit of healthy skepticism, right? Sales is not the people who are programming the feature. They're not the people testing or approving the feature for release, ask them to bring in a product manager or someone from their development org to talk to you about where the feature is in development or how long they think it's going to be, especially if this is a feature that would be like kind of make or break, like middle to high on your requirements list in the ranking. You don't want to end up sitting around and saying, well, we've paid for this thing, but we can't really use it because they haven't shipped feature X that we really love and need. You want to make sure that when you're into your MDM, you are ready to go and have everything available. I am not an expert at this. Obviously, it's not my job. I'm a Mac admin. But I did stay at the Penn Stater last night, so 50-50. A few tips, and your finance people will probably agree with most of these. Always ask about volume discount pricing. Even if you're developing an MDM solution for a just tiny little group of people, always ask. It's worth knowing where those price breaks start in case, you know, like I mentioned before, I did a lot of merger and acquisition. Those came out of nowhere. So it was good to be able to tell leadership, hey, I know we're at about 500 people now. We're going to get a price break because you're adding another 60 folks through an acquisition. So, you know, that acquisition cost is going to be a little lower. Or to be able to say, you know, hey, you know, we're at 475 people. It might be cheaper to buy more licenses to the 500 and build that growth in ahead of time, save some money now, even if we've got extra licensing. So always ask where the tiers start. Sometimes it's 100, sometimes it's 1,000, sometimes it's even higher, but it's worth knowing. If you have them, lean on your finance or procurement teams for help with negotiations. I'm terrible at negotiations. Like, I look at the dollars, I'm like, okay, that's what it costs. And our finance team looks at me and says, no, that's not what it costs. You can always ask for more discount. So if you have those teams, lean on them. Ask them for help, ask them for advice, provide them all the documentation to show, hey, this is what vendors are charging in the market. I think, you know, these two vendors we're looking at have similar comparable services. Here's the pricing for them. Do you think we can do better? It's always worth an ask. If you have a formal procurement process, security process, vendor approval process, especially if it requires some kind of certifications for vendors to have, ask for those documents ahead of time. So if you're kind of whittling it down in your mind and you've got maybe one or two, even three vendors that you're like, I think it's going to be one of these three, don't be afraid to ask them for those documents ahead of time. Again, it helps prevent those nasty surprises. It also helps shorten turnaround time, especially when you're talking about compliance documentation or negotiating, you know, a non-disclosure agreement or something like that. That's, you know, 4 to 6 weeks sometimes that you can have back in your pocket to put on your schedule instead of waiting on other people. And finally, we do need to talk about commitment. Hi, Molly, my girlfriend, who's going to watch this on YouTube later. Longer commitments can mean less cost. In most cases, vendors will, you know, give you a deal if you stick around for a long time. And hopefully, you're not going to do this more than once, right? Right? Cross those fingers. All right, so we have our list of vendors. We've gotten some initial pricing. We've talked to them. We've gotten our trial accounts. Let's run some proofs of concept. Personally, I would not purchase an MDM without being able to try it out first. I mean, it's kind of like test driving a car, but even more important because on some of those cars you're going to test drive, like the gear lever is over here instead of down here and the steering wheel's on the roof, right? You really need to get used to how all these products work for you and in your environment. I have yet to find a vendor who is not open to running a trial or proof of concept, or at least like, hey, here's a handful of licenses for free and a login for the next 3 weeks, right? I highly recommend that you test every tool that is on your requirements list in a structured, methodical way to make sure you're comparing things accurately, right? You want to have a set of configs that's going to be replicated across everywhere. Doesn't have to be every single configuration you might load when you actually do buy an MDM, but it should be a representative sample. Again, this is why you rank your requirements. You can say, all right, top 10 requirements, we're going to implement those in all of our trials. The other part that I think is critical is testing the entire device lifecycle from start to finish, from brand new out of the box through to whatever your process is when an employee leaves, when an employee gets a computer refresh, when you have to re-image things. Test all those different touch points to see how these tools are behaving. I've run into tools that were amazing for out-of-the-box experience, but when you re-imaged a device, if you didn't delete it from the old MDM first, it would still think it was the old device and it would have the wrong names on it, right? So all these little things that you can kind of understand, what are the roadblocks I'm gonna run into when I start to actually operate this product? Try all the features that you think make that vendor unique. So is there a really good built-in onboarding screen flow? Do they have an integration with G Suite or whoever your identity provider is? Do they have inventory integrations? Try them out, right? Even if they're not top on your list, understanding kind of each vendor's special sauce is gonna help you when it comes time to actually decide what's going on here. And the last thing is to take notes. Take notes, especially if you're evaluating more than like 2 vendors. You will absolutely forget, oh, was that vendor A or vendor B that it was really tough to deploy that piece? And then you're gonna be sitting and like, well, I hope I have this right. Take notes, it's the easy way. Again, another screenshot with names redacted to protect the innocent here. This is an excerpt of the sheet I used to track one of my proof of concepts. So it's a little sanitized, but this is a list of configs that we needed to do a basic new machine bootstrap. So this is kind of our top list of things that we need to make a machine function, right? I had a couple different sets. I had this one for new machines. I had one for migrating machines. I had some for iOS and iPadOS. And again, this was a way to make sure that for each vendor, we were going to deploy those same configurations and get that same testing experience every single time. By creating that basic set, you'll have that apples to apples. Oh, that's bad. That's bad. How easy was it to set up? How easy will it be to maintain? What happens when Apple adds a couple new features to that profile? Is it easy to edit? Is it just some more checkboxes? Is this a custom thing you need to write the XML for yourself? Is this like a GUI builder where it's just, you know, checking boxes and you're good to go? If so, how fast does the vendor support it? Can you scope all these things accurately so that your new hire onboarding only applies to the new hires and you don't accidentally push it to everyone? Ask me how I know that had to be on the list. Is everything easy to access in the admin UI that you need to do for these things you're gonna touch more frequently? Do you need to automate them via an API call or some other feature built into the product? Maybe a smart group or something like that, extension attributes. How do those function? Do they function the way that you want them to? Again, this is evaluations are kind of that balance between these are the places I want to go and these are the places tools will take me. And selecting the right vendor is really about finding the one that meets in the middle there. Which of these tools is going to let you build the workflow that you want to use for your devices? So now that we've done all of our trials, we gotta pick. So again, who meets those requirements best? I think this slide is kind of in order from easiest to hardest because it's kind of also quantitative to qualitative, right? The stuff at the top is pretty easy to check off some boxes. The stuff at the bottom takes some brain power. So who meets the requirements the best? That can be as simple as using your requirements list like a report card. Check off the boxes. You saw in that screenshot in my earlier slide, I literally had a yes, no, or partial support. And if it was partial, I had a comment, right? I could take a look and be like, well, this one's out because 3 of our top 10 things are not easy to do. Or this one might work pretty well because it hits all the top 10 with a full yes. Very literally, who's gonna do the thing, right? Next is who has the best SLA and support. SLAs are generally a contract thing, right? Like many of our MDMs these days are cloud software as a service, and the cloud is just someone else's computer. So who's gonna turn that computer off and back on again when something goes wrong? Is their support responsive? Do you have like a guaranteed response time where it says, yep, we'll get back to you within X number of hours? Do they have an uptime guarantee to say, hey, you know, we're gonna be up 99.99% of the time? And even better than that, will they give you service credits if they don't meet that SLA? The third one is a little tougher, and this takes a little, kind of divining on your part, talking to sales or product management. Whose roadmap matches your vision for the Apple platform? Obviously, we know there's a lot of kind of guessing and tea leaf reading and prognosticating that goes into being a Mac admin, right? You never quite know what Apple's going to throw at us every June and July and August with those betas. And who seems to have their finger on that pulse? Who has a good relationship with Apple and is trying to work inside the ecosystem? Who's going to be caught flat-footed because they're not keeping up with things? Sometimes this can be very easy to spot. You could look at a feature and it looks good from the outside, and then you're in your proof of concept and you're working through it, and you think, wow, this isn't going to work in 2 years. Like, when you think about it, the last time that we were all sitting in this room, if this isn't your first time, was 2019. The shipping OS was 10.14, and we were all trying to test the Catalina beta and download that over the Wi-Fi. How much has changed since 10.14 and 10.15? I mean, even 10.15 itself was a seismic change. Which of your vendors is going to be able to react quickly and give you the support you need to make sure that you can release that new OS on whatever your schedule happens to be? Whether you're a day one kind of shop or you're a how long can we stretch this deferral profile kind of shop, you need to make sure that that tool is going to match that perfectly. And then finally, who has the best value for the dollars? This one's the one I struggle with the most. Like I said before, it's like, all right, this is just what the dollars are, but I want the best tool for me. Well, finance sometimes gets in the way of that, right? This is where your requirements sheet can really help you, because you're able to rank who's meeting your requirements the best and make that argument for the tool you want, even if it might be the more expensive one. On the flip side of that, the requirements sheet can also help you show a finance or procurement person that, these tools are about equivalent in functionality, but one is more dollars, one is less dollars. Again, you're going to have to do a little bit of brainstorming here to try to say, is this worth the extra cash? But again, ask for your discounts. Can never hurt. So now you have your vendor. You've chosen them. You've signed a contract. You bought the thing. And now, the simple part, which is just, being a Mac admin and making it work, right? That's the easy part. It's not. Congrats. You're through phase one. The first thing you need to do is read the manual. Just read the documentation. It's always so tempting to jump in and mess around with things and play around with things. Do that, but also read the manual. Know the documentation. Be the documentation. Ask the best practice questions from professional support or from services or from the Mac admin Slack channel for that particular vendor. Ask how people are solving the more complex problems so that you are not reinventing the wheel, number one. But number two, again, you're sticking toward that paved path where the vendor is going to be able to support you in how you're using that tool. At this point, if you're not sure where to start, you can use your, say it with me, requirements. Told you I was going to be saying that word a lot. Use that requirements list as kind of a checklist to set things up in your MDM, right? You've at least got that top 10 or so configurations that you find critically important. Start there. I think the other thing is to pick a naming scheme. There is nothing worse than an unlabeled pile of junk, aka my closet box full of random cables and charger adapters. An MDM with no organization or naming scheme will quickly become a total mess. And it might be that you know where things are, but will the rest of your team know where things are? Will you in 6 months know where things are? Document everything as you go. That way, when you forget something, you can always have a place to look back. I think another understated reason that you would document things is you get to record the why of your decision in that moment. You get to say, this is why I made this choice of how I designed it. This is why I'm using a custom configuration profile instead of using the vendor's GUI profile builder. This is why I'm using this particular feature that this MDM has. It's because it gives us X. It's because it makes this simpler. It's because it integrates with this other system in a way that's not obvious. That why is helpful to remind yourself in a couple years when you need to update it. Okay, how can I not break the current stuff as I'm updating things? And finally, test it all again. And like the whole device life cycle. Again, you're starting from new in box, you're starting from re-imaged, you're starting with machines that might not be in Apple Business or School Manager. You're going all the way through to what happens to a device at the end of the life cycle when it's replaced or an employee moves on to another job. Which brings us to phase 2, which is actually migrating. In my mind, there are probably like 3 questions that you need to answer about the technical part of your migration. The first one, how are you going to unenroll your old devices from your old MDM, right? Because we can't change the MDM profile in one fell swoop. That's what makes this so difficult. The second, how will the tools and apps that you deploy handle your answer to the first question? Is there going to be like a million alarm pop-ups to users? Is it going to be quiet? Who knows? That's why we test. And third, which is probably my preschool teacher's favorite, how are you going to clean up after yourself? How do you make this neat and tidy? How do you make sure that you're not leaving old stuff that's going to bite you later? Those to me are the 3 important. So unenroll and re-enroll, how are your tools going to handle it, and then clean up. So let's start with unenroll and re-enroll, which is probably why a lot of people are here, because this is the hard part. It's definitely tricky, but there is a very narrow path to go on, which is helpful because that means we can make a flowchart, which is what I did. There are a bunch of different variables. All these variables have kind of an impact on which path you're going to take. Again, these are in the slides on my website, and I also have PDFs of this flowchart, so if you want to grab just the flowchart, you can do that. So let's start with talking with Mac OS. We'll talk through each variable and how it can impact those choices that you need to make. So the most important question here is whether your current MDM, so the one that you're about to leave, that all of your Macs are enrolled in, whether or not it supports unenrollment. Most do that I've run into, but not all. My policy for this talk is not to say any vendor names. So if you want to chat in the hallway, find me. Happy to share my experience off the record, but I want to make sure I'm not seen as shaming a vendor who's otherwise pretty good. On the back end, unenrollment is either the MDM sending a profile removal command for the enrollment profile, or it sends a push to the device to say, hey, please check in, and then sends back a 401 unauthorized HTTP status code. So it's relatively straightforward, but some providers just don't have that implemented. Either of those actions will trigger the MDM profile removal, which will remove all provisioned profiles. That includes certificate CA roots pushed as a profile. That includes SCEP or ACME certificates. Different MDMs call this different things. So on your MDM, boot up a test device and see what that button does. Some of them say delete, but it really means delete it and unenroll it. Sometimes delete just says remove it, but don't touch the device. Sometimes it's unassigned, sometimes it's unenroll. I've seen it as just remove, which is very ambiguous. Test it through, see what happens. If you get stuck, ask the support for your old MDM vendor, because you don't want to end up in a spot where you fully lose control of that old device before you can migrate it. If this option is available, it is 100% by far the easiest, most reliable way for you to get machines out of that old MDM, right? Because as long as they can talk to the old MDM, it's gonna unenroll. There's no extra steps. There's nothing the user needs to do to trigger that. It just works. There's no step 2, right? You can say, all right, I'm gonna just go through and click the people who are gonna migrate today and unenroll them. Or you could script it based on an API endpoint or something like that. Your control is easy and there's less things for the user to do. Now, the second question, and this pops up if MDM unenrollment commands are not supported, is whether or not your enrollment profile is removable or not. So literally, if you go to system settings or system preferences and then to profiles, you click on your MDM profile, is that little minus sign grayed out, or can you click it? There's a lot of different schools of thought on which is the correct way to deploy an MDM profile. We're not going to talk about that today. We could probably fill an hour just about that. The question is just a quick yes or no. This is something that only applies to devices that were enrolled with Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, right? Because if you're sending people a profile to enroll themselves, it's always removable. It's only these ADE devices that are going to be trapped, quote unquote, if you have a non-removable profile. If the profile is removable, then you should plan on removing the profile in an automated way. You can use the profiles command on the command line, profiles remove dash identifier, and then the identifier of your profile. You can get that by looking at the output of profiles dash L on the command line. If the profile is not removable, so the device is an Apple Business Manager or School Manager and is non-removable, we have another option, and that's if the ADE settings are adjustable. If you're able to recreate your ADE, DEP, ASM, ABM, whatever the three-letter acronyms your MDM happens to use, if you're able to recreate those settings to say, hey, you know what, I changed my mind. From now on, I want removable profiles, not unremovable profiles. Create those settings, assign them to all your devices. And then we're going to kind of abuse the MDM system's renewal functionality. The MDM enrollments, if you're not familiar, are all certificate-based, right? And certificates expire. So there has to be a way for the device to check in and renew that certificate to pull down new information from that MDM. When an MDM profile is about to expire, the device can renew that profile as long as the topic value of the certificate that's signed by Apple is still the same. So that topic, as an aside, is the reason why you always have to use the same Apple ID when you're renewing those Apple push notification certificates. That keeps that topic value consistent across all those certificates. So the key insert can change as long as that topic name is the same. And that's the reason for that. P.S. If you lose access to that Apple ID, contact Apple support. They can mess around with things to make sure that topic stays consistent for you. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set those ADE settings, say, hey, actually, no, you know what, removable. We want everything removable. We're going to keep that topic value the same because we're not changing anything with APNS. And then we're going to tell the devices, you're going to renew your certificate. We're going to force this. And you can do that through profiles renew dash type enrollment. We'll cover more of that, what that looks like in a second. I would also caution for folks who are not all on the absolute latest OS, from mid of Mac OS 11 through Mac OS 13.1, the check-in URL of your MDM also had to be the same as your old one. Most providers that I've run into pretty much never change that URL, but if you get that error, that's why. Talk to your provider to see if they can change that back. That was fixed in macOS 13.2 and listed as a bug fix, so I don't think it was intentional. But if you have that issue and you can't have your provider change it, upgrade your Macs to at least 13.2, and you should have an easier time. So when the device reaches out and does that renewal, it's going to respect whatever ADE settings are assigned to that device at the time that the renewal fires. So not that old non-removable, it's now going to reinstall and renew a removable profile. Therefore, we'll be able to remove the profile through that profiles remove dash identifier, whatever your MDM profile identifier is. So your profile is now removable. Congratulations, you just undid an immutable profile. So you might be saying, Rick, I got on my device as an Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, but I can't adjust my ADE settings and my profiles are removable. You might have a problem here. If you're not able to adjust those ADE settings to renew into a removable profile, you're kind of stuck. There are some methods that folks in the community have figured out how to boot Macs into recovery mode, mount the partition, wipe out all the profile stuff. If you have a tiny deployment, that might work for you. It might also break something in the future because it's not really supported by Apple. But if you're talking anywhere above a couple dozen machines, that's not very scalable. I hope you have a dump truck full of cash and whoever you buy your Apple hardware from is very excited to speak to you. That's one way to do it. And the other way is erase all contents and settings, which is not very fun. So this is kind of like the last resort of that decision tree. At that point, backup and reimage is going to be the best way. Now, that's might not be a problem for you because you might be saying, Rick, I take care of labs. I get to wipe those every summer. Hallelujah, you got the easy button for this one. For those of us who are managing mostly one-to-one deployments, this is kind of a nuclear option. It's a really tough sell. I've had to do it once for about a group of 30 people. Hands-on support was the way that we made that easy, was really walking through people one-on-one and making sure they had plenty of time to back things up, they were comfortable things were backed up, and that we could help them restore their data while they were still sitting there. It was messy, but that was the best way that we had. On the other side of the equation, so we've done the unenroll, now we'll do the enroll, the install. This is a lot simpler of a chart. If your devices are in Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, assign them to the new MDM and use the profiles renew command, right? That's still gonna pull in that new profile. It's gonna be an ADE deployment. So if there is any authentication you need to do there, it's gonna be a supervised device. You get everything. It's lovely. If your devices are not all in Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, your next question to yourself is, okay, do I want them there, right? So if these aren't BYOD devices, or there's some reason other than that you don't want them in Apple Business Manager or School Manager, we'll get to that, but you probably do. If they're newer than a T2, or if they're an M1 or M2 laptop, and you're okay with erasing them, I see some nods, you know where I'm going. We can use erase all contents and settings or image them with Apple Configurator, and then use Configurator for iPhone to conditionally enroll them to Apple Business Manager. So at that point, if you're going to be touching every machine, it's probably worth the extra minute or so per machine to also go around and make sure that they're added conditionally. Because that way, if you ever have to do this again, or wipe a machine again, you've got the benefits of Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager. If not, good old user enrollment. Prompt them to download the mobile config file, prompt them to install it, prompt them to click the yes, I love MDM button, and they'll be able to do it manually themselves. It is worth mentioning, if you haven't done an MDM migration in a while, and I mean really a while, that truly silent migration isn't possible anymore. I think that went away in 10.8 or 10.9, maybe Yosemite, where the user had to affirmatively click, yes, I approve this migration, this MDM profile, even if you renewed with profiles renew-type enrollment. It used to be you could just script it and everything would go away and everything would come back and it was beautiful and the user didn't have to touch anything, but in this newer era of, kind of the more user-approved, user-aware things, that's really not possible anymore. In that spirit, I will also caution about the profiles renew command. It has to be run in a user context, and that's a user on the machine. So if you have a remote agent through, I don't know, your antivirus or through your old MDM, you're not going to be able to trigger the renew command properly from that context. It does work from a launch agent perfectly, so that's a relief. So you'll need to script it on the device rather than having it be scripted from somewhere remote and it doesn't run as root. You'll get an error that's like, the return error was null 00 or something like that, is the one you'll get if you try to do that. All right, so we've got the method. Let's talk a little bit about tooling now. As an aside, some vendors will do this for you. One of them who is here. $1 for anyone who finds it out first. There are vendors who will make these kinds of tools for you and help you through this process. Absolutely ask your salesperson if it's included, and if it is, use all the help you can get. A lot of these pro services teams have migrated from every MDM under the sun into theirs. They're going to tell you what the specific hiccups you could run into are and help you get around them. My tool of choice, if your old MDM supports those unenrollment commands, is UMAD. I actually stole a lot of the logic from this tool for our migration, which I'll talk about in a second. UMAD was created by Eric Gomez, who is also the creator of Nudge. You can see the family resemblance. Got the same nose. It has a ton of customization out of the box. It basically just watches to see whether or not an MDM enrollment profile is there. And when it's not, it pops up this lovely box and says either, hey, please click the notification in Notification Center, or hey, you need to enroll manually. So this is a no scripting, no coding, I just want to install the package and edit one configuration file way for you to get that communication to and from your users about what they need to do. This is on GitHub, github.com/macadmin/umad. For our situation, we had about 3,300 devices. Overwhelming majority of them were in Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager. We are all around the globe, so time zones were also a factor. We wanted this migration to be as self-service as possible. Our old MDM did not support unenrolling devices. It would delete them, which meant I'm going to forget about it, but the device doesn't matter, which doesn't really help us. So we chose to create a tool in Python, and using Swift Dialog for the GUI components. Shout out to Bart Reardon, Swift Dialog rules. If you haven't used it yet, it's a really easy command line way to get user pop-ups and notification. You can do all sorts of different graphics and text formatting. You can do user input, so you can collect data from them. Amazing tool, especially if you're like me, you don't know Swift UI. So we used a couple of different things to feed this process. If the machine was enrolled into our old MDM, we had a system to deploy this, which was Monkey. So that got the tool onto our machines. And it would essentially just pop up to the user with this screen right here and say, hey, we're going to need you to click a few buttons. When you click the OK, I'm ready button, it does the thing for you. The hardest part about this for us was figuring out whether or not that profile was removable already or not. I have not found a way to tell that from the bits that are on disk. I'm sure there's a private API somewhere. I am not that smart. If you are and you want to contribute that knowledge back and you need to do it anonymously, please tell me how, and I'm happy to blog here and there and everywhere about it. I think it's the one missing piece that made this difficult for us. The way we solved this is we used our old MDM's API. That old MDM had a value for what date the device was last enrolled. So that was on their side, what date the device last renewed its MDM certificate. So we shoved that with an API command into a profile and then deployed that profile to each device using variables. It kind of worked. The old MDM, that value, that date stamp was not always correct. So we basically said, hey, we're starting this, I think it was October 12th was our first day. If you've enrolled before October 12th, if that date's before October 12th, it's probably not removable. Let's just go through it. I would say it had like a 95% success rate, which is pretty good over 3,300 devices, but it's still difficult. So that's the biggest problem we had, was just finding out how to do that. Another note on that, if you're going to write your own tooling, keep in mind that profiles show -type enrollment on the command line, which shows you all your DEP settings. That's going to show the DEP settings that are currently assigned, not the ones the device enrolled in. So don't use that. You'll be staring at your test machines wondering why they don't work for at least a day, maybe 2. So about 6 weeks after our renewal step, we proceeded with our re-enrollment step. Again, very similar looking tool because it's the same framework, so people knew what it was. We were, again, using Python, Swift Dialog. We controlled the rollout with Monkey, so we did a couple % each day and then ramped it up slowly but surely. The Python code is called by a launch agent every hour. Checked if the machine was still in the old MDM. If it was, it alerted the user, hey, we need to move, let's get going. There's a not now button. If you're in the middle of a meeting, probably don't want to move MDMs. We also have some security tools that could make the internet a little bit flaky due to certificate problems for a minute or 2 between MDMs. When the user clicks OK, I'm ready, the tool in the background is just doing a profiles remove command. So that's unenrolling from that old machine, now that's old MDM, now that's removable. On the top right, you'll see there's 2 buttons. One says resend, which just does a profiles renew command again in case they dismiss the notification. And then there's the I clicked allow, which kind of puts it into a waiting mode it just waits to see, okay, how long is it going to take them between I clicked allow to click the banner, go to system settings, and click, yes, I approve this MDM update or enrollment. And then finally, just a little, okay, we'll ask you later. Now's not a good time. It'll just pop up again in an hour. Because we did a phased rollout, we felt that an hourly notification was probably okay. That may change for you, so that's something to think about. How often are you going to bother your users to do this? Some folks you might want to say, okay, we can only do it in the morning, or maybe you schedule it for certain break times. Maybe you only want to do it once a day, maybe you do it once a week. It all depends on your environment and how kind of urgent this was for you to get done. All right, so we talked about Mac. Let's talk real briefly about iOS and iPadOS. This is a lot more straightforward because obviously there's not as many variables in this. There's not an equivalent method to get an ADE enrollment if the device hasn't been erased recently. So there's one consideration that I realized this morning is not on this chart, and that's whether or not it's acceptable to you and your IT and security teams to have a profile that's removable on your mobile devices. Some organizations really don't like that, right? Like some orgs say it's got to be non-removable. We have to lock it in. That's it. Well, your choice is pretty clear. You're going to erase, right? You're going to erase and use ADE. If it is acceptable, or if we're talking about BYOD, we have a couple more options. Again, if the devices are supervised or the profile is not removable, you're going to use that MDM unenroll command and re-enroll them manually, or erase all contents and setting, or an MDM initiated remote wipe, and then use ADE. If you want those devices that aren't in Apple Business or School Manager to be there, this is a great time. If you got to touch them anyway, use Configurator. Use it to wipe, use it to conditionally enroll, or if you really just like pain, you can do it all manually if you want. We used Configurator for a lot of our Zoom rooms. They had just bought, when they were building offices, they had just gone to an Apple store and bought like 80 iPads or something like that. So we said, all right, we'll set you up with USB hub and just go around, plug them all in, get them enrolled. And it was super, super simple to do. All right, so that's step one, which is unenroll and re-enroll. Now let's talk a little bit about post-migration tasks. So there are a lot of knock-on effects about unenrolling and re-enrolling, right? The biggest one that we ran into was around system extensions. If you are using a system extension tool, probably your antivirus or your EDR tool, that's going to break as soon as you unenroll from your old MDM. Because if you've approved your system extension for that tool through MDM, when that profile gets removed, that approval gets revoked too. So it's going to sit in that terminated waiting for reboot state if you do system extensions control list on the command line. And that's probably not very acceptable to your security department. So you need some kind of method to do some cleanup. Some other things we ran into, obviously, while you're in that in-between state, you have no client certificates. So if you use client certs for office Wi-Fi or to authenticate to things, none of that's going to work. Other certificates, maybe you have a security tool that requires you to trust a certain private CA. Those are going to be broken. And then you're going to have apps that don't react well to being unconfigured. My last job, we used Nomad, and Nomad freaked out. When you took out the profile, it would pop up its settings window over the top of everything with all the fields blank, and people would go, I don't know what our AD controller is. What is this? And they would freak out, and then like 3 seconds later, the new profile would come down, fill it all in, and it would disappear, and they'd go, do I need an AD controller? What am I doing here? These are things that you can prepare your users for. If there's nothing you can do about the tool, you can say, hey, you're going to get a lot of crazy pop-ups. Just breathe, breathe, and they're gone. Okay, don't think about them again. It's fine. It's wise to have some sort of process to kick off and clear this stuff up, whether that's reinstalling your EDR, whether that's doing a little cleanup on disk, whatever it is. The very least, you could use a no package style package, right? Build a package that just has a post-install script to do some of this stuff. If your new MDM has script running capability, that would be a great time to use it. Or you can do what we did and really over-engineer it, but make it pretty. So we used install applications for our onboarding. So we said, you know what? Hey, why not use it for our migration onboarding too? So we're using install applications, which is, again, a tool from Eric Gomez. He's a great guy. He shares all his code with us. And all it does is push down a small package that then can do specific tasks and install specific packages in a very specific order. So we could say, all right, we're going to install DEP notify and make sure Swift dialog is there so that we have some communication with our users about, Here's your progress bar, here's what's going on. It makes sure that the monkey tools that are installed on the device are healthy and functional, that our middleware is there. So if it broke at some point and someone's just been kind of getting away with a half-managed machine, well, now it's going to be properly managed. It's going to run monkey, which is going to heal things like our EDR tools, a couple other security tools, as well as remove all of the pieces that were used to trigger the migration, right? So that way we're making sure that no one's going to get, like, through my terrible code, a bad notification where they're like, well, I just migrated. Like, why am I getting more migration pop-ups? The other thing that was really important for us is file vault, right? So we obviously want it enabled, but we also wanted to escrow some recovery keys. Some ways to do this include using your MDM, but also using a solution like Crypt, which is escrowing to a separate server. We wanted to use our MDM. The only way to get that done is to rotate the file vault key, and that requires the user to type in their password. So you could get around this by decrypting the device and then re-encrypting your device. Our security team said, ain't no way that's gonna happen. So we didn't. We created a workflow that prompts the user for their password and then runs FTE setup change recovery dash personal. That basically tells File Vault, hey, rotate the key, and then the MDM escrow system takes over from there. And finally, prompted the user to reboot. Who doesn't like rebooting? My users. So that kind of helped us, you know, make sure everything was in place, kind of cleared out any old pending system extensions that were pending reboot. Just, you know, kind of general cleanup there. All right. We've got most of our planning done here. We're going to test some more. I've said this a million times. I think testing is the most important thing you can do with this. Machines, especially if your company's been around a while, if you're kind of a hybrid like my last job was, where we've been through a lot of merger and acquisition, your laptops and desktops are in weird states, right? None of them are super consistent. It's going to take a while for you to figure out, okay, this works for my test machine, this works for a brand new machine, this works for my personal machine, or, you know, Bob in sales, who is agreed to be my test guinea pig with me. What about all these other people who came in at that acquisition? What about these people who had this special exception because of some research app that they had to do? What about the people who are still on just the oldest possible OS that we support because they hate updating, right? There's a lot of different permutations for you to test. Grab a couple old laptops, try to force your machines into those weird corner cases that you know about. Just make sure that your tooling handles them. I want to touch on a few other things you'll need to know in the migration process as you're planning it. And these were things that kind of, some of them bit us and some of them we planned for at the front and it helped us a lot. The first one is stale, lost, or stolen devices. We all have a ton of devices at the bottom of our inventory list that haven't checked in for, you know, 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, right? There's those couple where it's like, oh yeah, that might have been stolen at some point. I think I sent a lock command to it, but I just never removed it out of the MDM. Well, you should sit down with your security and IT teams and figure out what to do with those, because at some point when you're going to need to cancel the payments on your old MDM, then what, right? Like, you need to prepare them for the fact that MDM, the way MDM works, it's not going to queue, even if you sent a lock command, it's going to queue a check-in. And if that MDM server is gone when it does check in, you're not going to get a lock or wipe out of it. So a lot of times what we ran into was security saying, well, just push the lock command. It's like, it doesn't really work that way. Pick a deadline is my recommendation. Set that cutoff date where you say, hey, if it hasn't been seen in 6, 8, 12 months, it's probably not going to come back. Someone probably did an internet recovery wipe if you don't have a firmware password, or they DFU restored it or revived it, or they did something, it's not coming back. Let's remove it, remove the cruft, make a clean break, cut the umbilical cord a little bit. And second is to set ownership on that. So who's responsible for saying, this is our cutoff point, this is when we're going to stop? The second thing is metrics. We're a Splunk shop. I made a dashboard, my first Splunk dashboard, it's great. Track all your migration state. Have a way to say, okay, I have this many machines that haven't started yet. I have this many that still need to renew their profile, this many in the old MDM, this many in the new MDM, this many in the middle who aren't in any MDM at all that I really need to go chase. And define acceptable overdue thresholds for that. So say, hey, you know, we're okay if people ignore the initial ask for 2 weeks and then we're gonna start ramping things up. Or, hey, it's only acceptable for someone to be not enrolled for like an hour or two. We need to have a procedure to chase those people down. And tie that data to a serial number or a user. Again, it's not useful to say, oh, well, there's 3 machines that are unenrolled. Well, which 3? That's kind of important. You need to know who it is so you can chase those users down and say, hey, can you finish the thing? Now for everyone's part, which is writing. I know everyone loves writing. Our communications fell into 5 buckets. Heads up, which is this is coming. This is what it's going to look like. Here's some screenshots. You're going to have to click some things. We'll be in touch when it's time. The your turn notification, which is that pop-up to say, hey, it's your turn. Let's go. Click the button. We're going to have some fun today. We're going to migrate. The third one is you're late. That's the, hey, you were supposed to do this like 2 weeks ago. Can you use your pointer finger and click there. The fourth one is you're in trouble, which is when we talk to your manager because you've been ignoring us. And the last one is don't forget the how-to. Some of the more technical users, again, we're a tech company. There are 400 or 500 engineers who are deeply interested in what things are running on their machines. We made a little technical how-to, like, hey, if you want to know what this tool does, here's all the things, here's how MDM enrollment works. Like, I had like a 2-hour conversation with a developer who was just fascinated by the whole way that MDM works. And he came out of it like an evangelist for the cool stuff we were doing with our new MDM, because he was like, this is really wild. Like, I work on embedded Linux devices, and I think this is cool. So yeah, you might find a champion or two through this. A little more writing is always going to help you. This is probably the last of the writing program, which is good. You've got your internal communications done, right? You've written up your user communications, you've written up your documentation, you've written all the copy for your notification apps. Now it's time to write for your internal audience. Write up your release schedule, socialize it with management, make sure there's not some super secret project that's gonna launch the same day that you're trying to launch some migrations. Use a ton of screenshots, use screen capture videos, offer live training for colleagues who are on your support or help desk teams. Some people learn best in that kind of interactive environment. Some people like watching videos, some people like just reading a K-base. Offer all 3, make sure you're capturing as many people as possible there. And now, Robert, I'm sorry, this is the wrong spaceship. Blast off, let's go, let's do it. We're gonna migrate, yeah. But first, don't forget to take care of yourself. This is a wildly stressful process. It has a ton of sharp edges. You have been working yourself to the bone for at least a few weeks, if not months, trying to get this absolutely perfect. You need to take care of yourself too. Work with your teammates if you have them. Spread the load out a little bit. Keep your work schedule realistic. Try not to add extra hours. Keep in mind you're going to have to do the rest of your job on top of this huge project this whole time. So try to set some boundaries. Be careful about your escalations. If you're in multiple time zones as a business or an organization, nominate people who are not in your time zone to help people who are not in your time zone. So that way you're not sitting at dinner with your family, just a couple more, just got to respond to a few more people on Slack. I fell into that trap real early on, and it's a burnout trigger. So the worst outcome is that your fleet is okay, but you are not. So make sure you're planning for yourself and giving yourself space to not only keep the lights on with your Mac admin work, but to also do this huge, huge project. Second of my 6 suggestions, deploy to your new laptops first. And that's not new hardware age-wise necessarily, that's new as in net new. So that might be your new hires, that might be interns, that might be people who are refreshing and getting a new laptop to replace an old piece of hardware, or their laptop had an incident with some water or some coffee. New laptops don't have that cruft, those weird corner cases as much. That will let you prove out, okay, my configurations work as is, right? That way you're not testing both my migration work and does my configuration work. You have that chance to deploy new and say, yep, I know it's gonna encrypt, I know it's gonna deploy the apps, I know the certificates are there. You have that choice to really prove out that part first before you throw the migration crazy into it as well. The next one is how I was an IRC for a very long time, lurk mode. Deploy your tools early. Set them up so that you can trigger them separately or that you have a really reliable way like Monkey to deploy things that you trust. This means that if you've got, a 10% deployment going out one day, you're not going to be scrambling should something break. UMAD's a perfect example of that. It just kind of sits there quietly in the background. User wouldn't even know it's there until that enrollment profile goes away, and then it is cueing the marching band about clicking these notifications. Don't do it all at once. For a very small org, that might be okay. 3,300 devices? No way. Take your time, start slowly, ramp it up, ramp it a little more, ramp it a little more. What's this gonna do for you? It's gonna keep you sane, number one. Number two, it's gonna make sure that your help desk can also keep their other tickets moving while also supporting any issues that you're gonna have. And number three, speaking of issues, if you find some bug, much better to have it go against 1 or 2% of your fleet than 100%, and then you're having to deploy fixes to literally everyone instead of just that little slice. So that blast radius containment is really important. At the same time, don't be afraid to pause. If you need time to fix something and test it, take it. I mean, your users are probably happy to wait a day between notifications. Like, they're probably really okay with it, actually. Your smooth migration is going to be better than them waiting on ticket replies. Keep in touch with your help desk, slow things down or pause if they have other incidents. Pause for holidays, pause for sales end of quarter periods, company-wide events, anything that could really add a lot of stress to people. Give them a break and give them a pause. We had a rule: we did not deploy to new migrating people on Fridays. We just didn't, because we knew we didn't want to spend Saturday helping people clean up. So Thursday evening was the latest we would put someone into a migration bucket. We could help them on Friday. And if people were like, I have a 3-day weekend, I'm going to do this on Monday, that was okay with us too. Support your support. Some of us Mac admins, like myself, we're really just kind of engineers. We take some escalations. Some of us are sitting next to the frontline team. Some of us are the frontline team. Whatever that case, always make sure you are supporting your support team. This is kind of a weird process that many support generalists will have never seen before, right? They might not be comfortable in the terminal. They might not know how MDM profiles work. They might not know any of the command line things that they may need to troubleshoot. Take the time to give them the training, give them the documentation, write call scripts or ticket auto replies, or things that are going to shorten their touch times up. Be clear what hours you're available for escalations. Be clear how you're going to take those escalations. Do they assign you the ticket? Do they add you as a CC? Do they ping you in a Slack channel? Be really clear with them so they feel like they're supported. What we found is that giving our help desk the most support possible meant that we were getting less escalations because they took more ownership of it. They felt more empowered to say, well, I have all this documentation. I have a great decision tree about what things to try. I'm not just going to throw it over the escalation fence as soon as I see it's a migration problem. I'm actually going to try to go through these things. Not everyone, but a good chunk of them. And that helped keep us sane on the CPE side. Leverage your metrics, inform your progress, your error rates, things you need to fix, even when things aren't really going as well as you expect. It's way better to be able to say to supervisors and managements, we are X% done, rather than, yeah, it's going okay, right? Like, data really reinforces your use case for the tools. It helps them realize that you're serious about making this go well and that you have a measurement of when you're done. Bother your users. Bother them a lot. How many folks in here use Nudge or things like that to bother their users? Yeah, a couple. We found that about 90-ish% of people, given a week or two, will do what we ask them to, whether that's update the OS, renew their profile, remove and re-enroll, that kind of stuff. About 5% need like 1 or 2 one-on-one, hey, Rich, can you please just do that for me sometime today or tomorrow? Awesome, cool, thanks. And then about 5% need to be like just yelled at, honestly. We ended up using emails, Slack DMs. We pulled people into everyone who was overdue into a channel and used the @channel thing like 3 times a day on Slack, which is a huge red flag anywhere else, but it was a great way to bother people. Eventually what we found was effective was emailing people's managers. A lot of those managers had done the process already, and they were like, y'all, it takes 5 minutes. It's totally smooth. Why aren't you clicking the button? It's not that hard. That was really effective. If I had to do this again, when I have to do this again, I think I'd automate that. I think I'd pull those metrics and just automatically email the managers at that cutoff date and say, hey, this is what we need from your employees. Finally, celebrate when you're done. This is a huge milestone. If you have any amount of Macs and or iOS or iPadOS devices and you have moved them into a new MDM, that is a massive achievement. Have a cake. Send out some recognition to your team and anyone who helped you through the way. Highlight everyone's contributions, say thank you, and live it up for a little bit, because you never know when you might have to rewatch this talk and do it all again. That's all I have for today. I hope I've answered some of your questions and teed you up for success. We have about 5 minutes left that we can use for a formal Q&A. I'm going to stick around through the break, and I'll be out in the hallway. If you have a one-on-one question that we don't have time to answer, come on up. There's also a feedback URL. If you have feedback from me about how I did with my presentation, please hit that. It's also in the Slack channel, PSU Mac 206. Thanks everyone for your time. Appreciate it. All right, well, time for a couple questions. Anyone have one? Thanks, everyone. We're gonna try this. Ready? Yes! Didn't spill.
It's a question when evaluating new vendors. The one thing that I was always the tricky thing I found is, how do you effectively try to see, is their support good or bad? Because when you're onboarding or anything else, they always try to, you don't deal with the real experience. I don't know if you have any good suggestions on that.
2 suggestions on evaluating whether support is good or bad. One is the community. Find the Slack channel for the Mac admins who are using it and ask them. Because like you said, they might have people on a trial and the special, reply to them faster thing. The second thing that I try to do is pretend to have a problem. I'll fake that I don't know what I'm doing for a specific thing, especially if it's a little complicated. And I'll just open a ticket and say, hey, doing a trial, need to know how to do this. See how quick it is. See if they're just going to send you a documentation link and close the ticket. See if they'll offer a screen share or a call. You run the risk of them putting you in a little bit of a softer touch for that first part of the trial, but I think it's worth it to try to get that firsthand experience. We got one up here, Rich. That's why they're soft. It's fine.
So for the step when you are changing over from a non-removable profile to a removable profile, is the only profile that gets affected in that scenario just the MDM enrollment profile? Do
Excellent
they yank
question.
the existing profiles and then put them back?
Excellent question. So no, it is the only profile that is affected. So when you do a renew, it's only affecting the enrollment profile. It does not affect your system extensions. It doesn't affect client certificates or device certificates. It's just touching that. Because again, this is using the same process that it would use if that certificate was close to expiring. So it's not an unenroll and re-enroll. It's just touching that cert. So it's very low impact in comparison. Right behind you. Yeah, short throw.
So next time you have to do this, let's say you have 2,000-3,000 machines. Your current MDM expires on January 1st. When do you start planning the whole process? Is it a 6-month thing or?
Great question. So how long for planning?
Planning and doing, right?
Planning and doing,
okay,
yeah.
Current MDM sucks, we need to switch.
Right. I really think that depends on 2 things. Number one, how complicated is your setup? Right? If you're the kind of setup where it's relatively low touch, there's not a whole lot, or if you're doing things like, this is only for MDM, we're going to keep our package distribution through Monkey or something like that, that might be quick. Scale obviously changes that, but the second thing is how much keep the light on activity you have to do as a Mac admin. So when I came to Samsara, this was my project. I had a couple keep the lights on things, but really my whole focus from my first day was get this migration up and running. So we were able to pull this off. We started evaluations in June, and we were finished migrating in March.
Okay.
So, and for about 3,300 Macs and about 800 iOS and iPadOS devices. And that was just me. That was my project. That's what I did the whole time. So I think it really needs to be custom tailored to you. I would say at least a couple of months for evaluation and planning, and then at least 6 to 8 weeks to move your devices, more if you're a larger company. All right, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your conference.